All right, it is past 6 o'clock, so we'll call the meeting to order. And additions or deletions from the agenda, we do have a resignation that we're going to add onto action items. So under action items or resignation, I don't believe there's anything else for additions or deletions. Do you? Correct. No? All right, so do we all have a chance to look at the minutes from our last meeting? If so, any questions? No questions. So motion to approve the minutes for the July 20th meeting. And do we have a second? Second. And we have a second. All right. So any questions from the public about the minutes from our last meeting here in the auditorium? No questions. So all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None opposed. Meetings are passed. So moving right to discussion items, reopening discussion. Who would like to take over the discussion?
So I'll start the conversation just by saying, for those people that are watching on YouTube, we have made Kingdom Access aware that the chat is disabled at this point. So if you do have questions before the chat does get enabled, please feel welcome to email me at B as in boy, RICCA at stjsd.org. BRICCA at stj.org. And thank you to the folks at Kingdom Access. I know they're working to get the chat enabled for us tonight. The majority of this conversation is going to be handled by our co-principals, Lydia Cochran and Jeremy Ross. I want to thank them and the Reopening Task Force for all of their work in putting together this document for reopening. I will frame their comments as they go through the document in front of you by starting where I started when we had a meeting a month ago, in which I shared with all of you that this is coming from a place where we're going to approve and apply an ethic of care to the work that we're doing. We're in the mode of rebuilding relationships with all of our students. Candidly, we're going to be in the mode of rebuilding relationships with all of our adults. Our new employees are coming tomorrow. All of our staff are returning on Wednesday. We have a lot of rebuilding to do. Most folks obviously are a little bit nervous and are a little bit concerned. And as you'll see from the document that Ms. Cochran and Mr. Ross are going to go through with you, there's been a lot of very good and very careful thought put into this. So without any further comments from me, I'm going to turn it over to Lydia Cochran and Jeremy Ross.
Thank you. So I just want to echo what Brian said, that, the introduction and the rationale for our plan was really about how to balance a really outstanding educational experience for our students and balancing the health and safety guidelines from the state. And so where we started with the health and safety guidelines was that COVID is, I'm just going to read from it so I don't mess it up. COVID is transmitted through the air in droplets or aerosolized particles that form during speech, talking, singing, sneezing, and coughing. And as they fall, they generally fall within 6 feet. And so those two things of how do we create an educational experience while making sure that our students are maintaining the physical distance and minimizing the amount of droplets that they're exposed to. And so that came from the masks and the physical distancing. And while we took those two things, we wanted to make sure that while students were in school, they felt safe, they felt cared for, they were able to access their education. And that is the foundation for how we laid out the plan. Let's see. The plan is really about minimizing the transmission, preventing and minimizing. We do realize that the chances of us having an outbreak that's not something we can prevent, but we can do our best to minimize the transmission here in school. And so one of the things I'll start with is the Kovid testing. We're not requiring our staff or families to get a Kovid test before they return because it is only a moment in time. And so by the time we got results back, which is usually about a week, they could have been in contact with someone with COVID and then get a negative test result back, but still have been in contact with someone and unknowingly are then transmitting the disease. So we are recommending people, if they think they have symptoms or they think they've come in contact with someone, to contact their provider or to call 211 to find out if they need a test and then where and how they can access one. I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy to talk about masks.
All right, so most of the rest of this document really digs into the specifics of what we're going to be doing this year that look different or feel different, and are practices that, again, align with the guidance from the state, but also hopefully keep the experience for all of our students and our staff, those that we expect from St. Johnsbury School. So masks are one of the most important pieces that we'll have in place this year in an attempt to prevent the spread of the virus here at school. Anytime students are in school and within the classrooms and traveling about where they aren't able to be 6 feet or further apart, they'll be expected to wear masks, as well as same for staff. And we'll be working hard to make sure that we're building in times during the day where they'll have mask breaks. And we know that those will be needed more frequently at the beginning of the school year for everybody, and certainly more for our younger students in a lot of cases. Students will be able to take their masks off during times where they're not necessarily talking or not necessarily participating in something that would encourage more particles to leave their mouths. Face shields will be worn by teachers or they're able to be worn by teachers when they're at the front of the room teaching, as a way to allow teachers to project their teaching and for students to be able to see their faces. If they move from the front of the room out to where students are, then they'll need to make sure their masks are back on. Again, need to be further than 6 feet away to have the face shields in place. There are some exceptions for some of our students. We have had some contact with families who have had concerns about their students wearing masks and have reached out to us wondering about some alternatives. What we've encouraged them to do is go to their doctors and have that conversation with their pediatrician. And if after that conversation it still makes sense for us to give some thought to how to provide them an experience here where they're not wearing a mask, then their doctor should be writing us a note so we can have those conversations. The rest of this section really just talks about different types of masks. Essentially, they need to be covering your face like all of ours are up here right now. And there's more and more information kind of coming out on a regular basis around what the best masks are. So Louisa Driscoll, our nurse, has provided us that information on an ongoing basis. And we will continue to share that with staff and with the school community as it changes. And I guess the last piece of this, just important to mention, is to make sure that masks that are being worn to school follow our typical dress code. So certainly being aware of what they might say or any particular pictures or signs that might be on them.
So in addition, we'll be following the state guidelines around our cleaning protocol. So we have mapped out what things will be cleaned daily, what will be cleaned multiple times throughout the day, and what should be cleaned between uses. So as you can see, daily, our classroom desks, tables, and chairs, and all shared spaces will be cleaned daily. Door handles, light switches, handrails, restroom surfaces, elevator buttons, playground equipment, sink handles, everything that is more frequently touched will be cleaned multiple times throughout the day. And in between uses, toys, games, art supplies, instructional materials, we have worked with our teachers and staff members to make sure that they have the ability to provide individual supplies for students to mitigate, when they can, to mitigate the sharing and need for cleaning in between if students have their own pencil case, their own toy, the toys that they're playing with for that day or that week, and then cleaning in between. Next, we'll talk about ventilation as well, because that's also part of our prevention, is that we have a really wonderful ventilation system, and we will be running no recirculated air through the school. So the idea is that some ventilation systems, take the air out of the room and then they recirculate it and release it into other spaces. And that's just not conducive to this, how COVID works. So we will not be doing that. And all classrooms will be encouraged to have windows open and fans. We have, guidelines of how fans should be used so that they're not actually blowing the germs around the room, but they're expelling the germs outside and bringing in fresh air. We are encouraging students and families to, support students to wear additional layers to tolerate the additional airflow in the classroom as temperatures get colder. We as a school will provide that and also, set temperature guidelines of when windows and fans should be used.
I'm just going to tack onto that really quickly too about fans. One of the questions that's come up a lot from staff, and I know that students will question it as well, is the use of fans in classrooms. What we know is our building is incredibly hot at the start of the school year in all spaces, but especially as you are on the south side of the building and head upstairs. So fans are fine in classrooms. We're just taking precautions that as the weather cools, that we can use that to try to expel some of the used air in our classrooms as well. But we know that in order for us to provide some sort of comfort and working space for students, we need to have fans running in our classrooms as well. Physical distancing, we've really already talked about. We'll just quickly go over it again, where our goal is to keep 6 feet apart for all adults and children while they're here. We'll be using some markings on the floor so as kids are lining up and moving about the classrooms and moving about the school, that they'll have some prompts as to how to stay 6 feet apart, waiting for the bathrooms, things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And classrooms are being set up as teachers get back really thoughtfully in order to provide appropriate learning spaces, but also to make sure that students are 6 feet apart as much as possible in those places. The next section is on daily health screening. This is really where things will feel different at the start of the school year. This is a little complicated and there's a lot to it, so I'm going to walk through step by step, and I suspect that this might be an area where we end up with some questions, as we move forward, both from staff and from families who might reach out. The goal is to prevent anybody who may be sick from coming into the school at the start of the day. So there will be a pretty strict screening process for everybody who arrives, both staff and other adults, and then also students. We will have screeners at all of the locations where students enter the building, and there are clear steps that the screeners will take in order to be ready for doing the screening protocol with each of the students who arrives. So students will have the option of being screened at home by their parents, and there will be a ticket that they'll have access to. We'll be sending home at the start of the school year. That ticket will be something that the parents can fill out and then send with their child, and it's sort of a free pass into the building or onto the bus, we'll talk about in a minute. That really just provides parents a quicker way and students a quicker way of answering the questions that we're required to ask, and also to show that there's been a temperature taken at home. We are going to double up on the temperature, though, and also make sure that we're taking that as kids enter the school or get on the bus. We are aware, though, however, as students are outside in the weather, whether it's warm or whether it's cold, that sometimes affects the temperature. So sometimes, if possible, taking it at home will probably be most accurate. Once kids have gone through the screening process, either on the bus or entering the building, they'll be given a sticker to stick on their jacket or shirt or whatever makes sense, so that their teachers and anybody in the building realize or know that they have indeed been screened and everything's all set and they are good to go for the rest of the day. Kids who arrive late, which we know sometimes happens, will just be screened by the office. Mrs. Kimball and Mrs. Morey will be in charge of taking that on, or any other adult who might be in the area who can support. We'll make sure our screeners are there a little bit longer than normal, especially to start the year, because we realize that it's likely that we'll have a longer line of kids looking to enter the building at the start of the day. If we find a situation where there is a student whose temperature is higher than 100.4 or answers yes to any of our questions, like have you been around somebody who's been diagnosed with COVID, or have you traveled, those questions, then that student will need to go home. We will, hopefully, if it's at a bus stop, send them directly back with their parents and they won't get on the bus. There's a process in case that can't happen. Upon arriving at school, whether it's through the front door or whether it's off the bus, students will go directly to the nurse's office to an isolation room until somebody can come pick them up, just to make sure that they stay safe, and so do the rest of us. We are going to do our best to screen anybody who's being dropped off by a parent or somebody else in their car, so the parent won't leave until the student's been screened, and so that if there's a situation where we need to send a student home, we're able to do that. There is certainly a lot less wiggle room around this than normally, than what we normally follow as far as students being in the school and being sick. And we are aware that this screening process is going to probably end up at times, especially as we get into the winter and more children are sick with colds and more staff are sick with colds and other things that have similar symptoms. We realize that there may be times where we are sending students home or staff have to stay home for symptoms that typically they'd be allowed to be here for. But taking no chances and making sure that we're all staying healthy is our number one goal.
So as we move on to buses, to mimic what Jeremy just said, they'll have their screening ticket at home. They'll bring it to the bus stop. As they get on the bus, they'll be given the sticker. Once they're on the bus, all students will be given assigned seats. They will be wearing face masks, and they'll be asked to sanitize their hands before they board the school bus. And they will be arranged by age, so the younger students are in the front, middle aged in the middle, and older in the back. And they'll try and keep siblings together, just to because they're from the same household. Students will be spaced out as much as possible, and the bus windows will be kept open in order to provide the air movement. As soon as buses arrive at the school, they'll try and stagger the release so that they're not all getting off the bus at the same time. And as Jeremy said, any student who does not pass the screening will go right into the nurse's isolation room, and Louisa and her staff will take it from there, contacting families and making sure that we're keeping everyone safe. Yes. So that's the process for the bus. Some really important things to note is that we are encouraging families to transport their students to and from school if they're able and as much as possible to minimize the number of students on the bus. This is very important. Students will only be able to ride their normal bus. They will not be able to ride a different bus depending on the dismissal of that day. So let's say they normally ride bus 3, but you need them to go to their aunt's house. So normally you can call and have them switch to bus 5. You will not be able to do that this year. They will only be able to ride the bus that they are assigned to based on what you work out with Butler's bus. And if you have students riding the bus, we're asking that you wait at the bus stop in case they do not pass the screening, so that we don't have any students who have not passed the screening and then left at the bus stop without an adult. We will not leave any students at the bus stop without an adult. We'll then have to bring them on the bus to the school and then contact the families to have them come get the student, which means that a student who did not pass the screening is then being exposed to many more students and adults in that way. So we're asking that families stay with their student at the bus stop until they are screened and cleared to get on the bus.
So the other way that we will be working hard to keep everybody healthy this year is making sure that we're on top of hand washing and sanitizing. So there will be sanitizer dispensers, that's what I was looking for, at all of the entrances to the school, and students and staff and other adults who enter the building will be asked to sanitize as they come in. Teachers will be working with students regularly to make sure that their hands are being washed on a regular basis in the classroom, before and after eating, after using the bathroom, any other time where they feel like they may have dirty hands and they're about to do something that would potentially spread the virus. Sanitizer will also be available in the classroom and will be used at times where it's appropriate for that. Times where their hands are not visibly dirty is the sort of the line that we're using to determine when it's best to use soap and water and whether it's okay to use sanitizer. All of our students are in classrooms where there's a sink and soap, so we'll all have access to that as we need it. Most or many offices also have that, and there will be times we'll be able to be in the bathroom to wash hands there as well. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Meals are quick. Let me just jump onto that one. So meals will continue to be served for our students. This is an opportunity to give a huge shout out to Carol Lee Stewart and her staff. They have done an incredible job over the last few months. Certainly were lifesavers to many in the spring when we dismissed unexpectedly, and have kept up in an amazing pattern of making sure that everybody has food that's needed it throughout the summer, and did not stop serving the last few weeks before schools. So there's really been no break in the access to food and access to food and meals that families needed at home over this time. So meals will be delivered to classrooms. Sorry, back up. So breakfast will look like bag breakfast that's available to kids as they come in the building. They'll be able to grab it when they come through the entrance, either off the bus or after being dropped off or walking in. Breakfast will be available between 7:30 and 8, and it will be taken to their classrooms to eat. The cafeteria is, just as a side note, really off limits this year. It's while a beautiful new space, it's one that we won't really be able to access for eating purposes this year unless things change drastically. We'll talk about some other ways that we will be able to hopefully utilize that space. Lunch will also be served and eaten in classrooms. Lunch will begin being served around 10:45. It's going to be dropped off outside classrooms in coolers. And teachers will have a process for recording who's eating that day from school or who has brought one from home. Bringing food from home is absolutely okay. And snacks should come from school or should come from home as usual. I've had a lot of parents ask about bringing food from home. It's okay to bring food and drink from home. In fact, we are highly recommending that there is every student has a water bottle at school if that's a possibility. If not, we'll be able to provide some. What we are asking not to have happen this year is any kind of shared food for birthday celebrations or other celebrations in classrooms, and we'll find ways to still celebrate as a school, but just in some different ways this year. I think I hit it all. I'll hand it back to you for bathroom.
I just want to add that we've actually worked out with Carolee Stewart and her staff to have celebratory snacks ready every day for students when there's their birthday. So now if a teacher has a student and it's their birthday at a certain time, they can either send them down or have the snacks delivered to be shared for the class. So we will still be able to have that celebratory feel, and there'll be a special healthy snack for the classroom, which is very exciting. Yes. Yes. Carolee will be serving hot lunch as much as possible, hot food, meals, lunch, breakfast, as much as possible. That's her goal. And so the coolers are actually, they will hold the hot lunch and to be served in the classroom, and bagged lunch will only be served in like necessary times. So as Jeremy said, we're encouraging all students to have water bottles. We will have, based on a great donation, we will have water bottles available for every student who doesn't have one. And we've asked teachers to schedule water breaks into their daily schedule. If they don't have a water fountain in their classroom to fill up the water bottles, they will have a time where they are sending students to the water fountains, which are now all bottle fillers, to fill up their water bottles. This is really important because headaches are a symptom of COVID, and we also see a lot of students in the nurse's office with headaches from dehydration and not drinking enough water. So our plan is to have a system that supports students staying very hydrated throughout the day. In order to make sure bathroom visits are as safe as possible based on the transmission of COVID, we are having grades 2 through 8 schedule bathroom breaks for their class. And the bathrooms will be, structured for distancing while in it. So in the girls' bathroom, there's 4 stalls, so the middle 2 stalls will be crossed up, sectioned off so that even while they're in the stalls, they're distanced, and then the middle sinks will be sectioned off as well. So even while they're washing their hands, they will be at least 6 feet apart. We'll help guide that with, as Jeremy said earlier, paws on the floor, and there are no more than 4 students in the bathroom at a time. Students can obviously go to the bathroom outside of that break, and we're just want teachers to be aware of, is it a time where other classes are using the bathroom at that time? Can they direct them to a different bathroom, or can they wait until that classroom's done and then go? Grades pre-K through first grade have single-use bathrooms in their classroom, which is why they don't need to create a bathroom break schedule. We'll move on to recess. It was really important to us to maintain our recess schedule to make sure students could get outside and play as much as possible, so as well as be able to access the outdoors. So classes will be able to be outside for their full lunch recess block, but we will still schedule time on the play structures. So if I'm in second grade and my lunch recess block is from 11 to 12, I could take my class outside and we could eat lunch outside from 11 to 11:30, somewhere where there's no other classes and it's, we're spaced out. And then at 11:30, I know it's our turn to go and play on the play structure. We can go and play on that at that time. We want to prevent a situation where we have many classes outside taking advantage of the outdoor space, so much so that then we are not being safe and physically distanced outside. So we're encouraging staff to use the outdoors as much as possible, but still have some sort of schedule so we're not ending up having 3 classes on the playground at one time.
So the next section is around moving around the building. This really just kind of aligns with the other things that we've already talked about, which is that hallways will be marked as much as possible just for kind of visuals to help students and staff remember to keep distance from each other as they are traveling around. The goal this year will be to have a limited amount of movement for students. Students will be staying in their classrooms as much as possible and not switching from space to space. Staff rooms are not going to be open for the typical use of having lunch in there for some of our staff who have that option. We will not be meeting in large groups this year, and our in-service begins on Wednesday, and we've thoughtfully put together that schedule so that groups will be in limited numbers in spaces throughout our building. The one aside from that is our opening in-service chunk of time, which will be outside. We're lucky the weather has stayed nice, so we're going to be able to be outside on the backfields. Spaced out and distanced, but still together as a staff, and we felt that was important to start the year that way. And as people come and go from classrooms and other spaces, there will be a contact log in each of those spaces, just so we can keep track of who is where and when, just in case somebody does get sick, and we need to figure out who they may have had contact with during the course of the day. The sort of standard is that if you are in a space for more than 15 minutes or closer than 6 feet with students or staff who are in that space, then we should be signing in and out of that classroom just so we know that somebody was there. Visiting the classroom looks really different, or visiting the school looks really different this year. And this is a hard one, I think, for all of us to swallow. We've worked really hard over the last few years to really make sure that the school is welcoming and that we encouraged community members and families to be here as much as they felt necessary and wanted to be able to participate in classrooms, and that really isn't something that we're going to be able to allow this year. Pre-K students' parents will be allowed to walk them to the entrance and get them through the screening process. All students in grades kindergarten through 8th grade will need to be dropped off, and they will need to walk in by themselves. There will be plenty of staff who are stationed around our doors and our hallways to help kids get to their classrooms, especially at the start of the year when things are a little bit trickier. Anybody else who is coming by the school is going to be asked to come in the front door out here, and you'll be stopped by Lori Kimball at our new front window, and we'll check in there. It's likely that there really aren't any situations where you'll need to move past that point. If you're picking up a student, we'll have them come down to meet you at the front door. There will be some opportunity when necessary for parents to be in the building for meetings, so we're going to encourage as much as possible things to be done virtually. We have a beautiful new conference room as well in our new office space, and that's a space where parents and teachers can meet if there's that necessity. We have not determined exactly what parent conferences and that time of the year will look like. There will not be a meet and greet or an open house at this point this year, just because we can't have that many people in the building at that time. Anybody who does enter the building, who are coming in to do more than just be at the front for a second to pick up their student, will be asked to go through the same screening process that all staff and students are following as they come into the building. And as expected, I guess, if somebody doesn't pass that screening, then we will not allow them past the front entrance to the building.
All right. We talked about visiting the school, and now we'll talk about travel throughout the year. We're following, we're modeling the state guidelines, and there's a cross-state travel map. And if a county is green, then you don't need to quarantine. If a county is in yellow or red, it is recommended that you quarantine. So we are asking we have been in contact with all of our staff members, and 2 weeks out from returning back for in-service, to make sure that they knew that if you were traveling to a red or a yellow county, that they would need to quarantine. And we're asking that staff and families follow these guidelines throughout the year. So if you know you're traveling and it is a yellow or red county, we're asking that you quarantine with yourself and your students at home, and then return to school. If you're living with someone who is traveling who travels to a yellow or red county, we're recommending that you call 211 to determine if you should quarantine as well. And there are also exceptions for essential workers that require travel. So there's a link on the electronic copy of this form, which will be available tomorrow, so that you'll be able to have just a quick link to see the map and make those decisions. It's updated every Friday, in case you're wondering. Field trips. So traveling outside of the building for educational purposes. All field trips will need to maintain all the health guidance. They'll be able to stay 6 feet apart, wear face masks, hand sanitizer, hand washing, all of that good stuff. And they just need to be approved by Jeremy or I before they're scheduled. So as long as we can ensure that the guidelines are followed, we are happy to have them. I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy to talk about the expectations for the first 6 weeks and remote learning.
So this will be our first time seeing our kids back in the building for the last 5 months. We're eagerly awaiting their arrival. We're going to use the next 3 weeks to really spend time thinking about all of the pieces that we're going to need to have considered and have in place in order to make that return a successful one for our students. There are some specific things that we are outlining in this document, and we'll be communicating with teachers with all staff over the next few days around really what those first 6 weeks will look like. Using our typical approach, either from responsive classroom or developmental design at the middle school level. The first 6 weeks is really about building communities in your classroom, forming relationships, getting to know each other, building those connections, building procedures and expectations, and establishing that foundation that the rest of the school year will be built off of to ensure success for all of our students. That will probably in my 20 years in education never be more important than this year. And so the things that we're going to really focus on as kids come back into our classroom are to teaching and learning the practices and procedures around being safe and healthy in this document, building classroom communities, building relationships between students and adults, supporting the emotional well-being of our students. We're going to be working to assess and determine academic readiness of our students. We know that there are some gaps that are going to exist from the last few months, and then work to plan instruction and intervention to the best of our ability while our students are here. And then also, I think equally important to every one of those is to really learn and practice the skills that are going to be necessary for remote learning. Obviously, within our hybrid model that we'll talk about in a second, remote learning is a part of that for most of our students. And If we find ourselves in a situation where we need to go to remote learning again this year as a full school, we want to make sure that all of our students and our staff are clear on all of the skills and the things that they need to know, that the access to technology, all of the skills that they need in order to make that as successful as possible. We have a chance this time around to really prepare and be ahead of the game a little bit more than we were in March. So as you certainly know by now, our model will be the hybrid model, which means that for most of our students, they will be here, they will either be in the red or the white cohort, which means red is here Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday, and white is Tuesday, Thursday. When students are not in the building, there will be opportunities for remote learning happening at home. We will be working together as a staff, grade levels, houses, different content areas over the next few weeks until we get to September 8th to really solidify what that looks like at each grade level. There is uncomfortably a gray area for us right now in that area, and we acknowledge that, and I think that the important piece of that is that our reopening team, Lydia and I, we don't feel comfortable saying this is the way it has to look, and this is the way that all teachers need to proceed with this. We need to really take into account that, again, probably at no other time, the collective wisdom of our faculty is going to be incredibly important in making the right decisions around how best to support our students. And so that the outcome of that will mean that it will look a little bit different and feel a little bit different at different grade levels. But that's, I think, a logical necessity when we're thinking about different developmental levels, different ages, different ways of approaching education, depending on the age of the student. Once our initial assessments are really done, when we come back to school, we'll dig into getting really high quality instruction in place for all of our students that are it's really focused on the high leverage concepts that may have been missed back in the spring when we had to leave, and then move on to the high leverage concepts for the current grade. We acknowledge that based on this schedule that we're going to have to look at our curriculum and that we will not be getting through all of the pieces that we normally would be. Just to kind of wrap this area up, again, it feels a little bit like this is an awfully small portion of this very large document coming back, and the most important thing that we will be keeping in mind as we re-enter is really the education of our students. And so again, I would ask that you give us the next couple of weeks, several days, to really work through this and begin to formulate more clear plans that will be communicated with families by grade levels and by us. Attendance is required to be taken every day this year, so that looks like the common practice of attendance when they're here at school. When students are home on remote learning days, we will also be taking attendance. We are still bound by the same requirements of having a certain percentage of our students in attendance to count as a school day. And the way that we'll determine whether a student is in attendance is a few different options. There may be some contact between that student and a school staff member. So teacher might have a connection with a student through email, interacting, asking some questions, or getting some support. There may be a phone call. There may be a time where they can Zoom in and connect. There have been some discussions, at least at some of the older grade levels, of having a morning meeting stream live through Zoom. So students are expected, even on their remote learning days, to be up and ready to go at 8 o'clock and connecting with their classmates from home, but during advisory or during morning meeting. Our goal in this is to the best of our ability, with the support of families and other caretakers at home, keep it still feeling like school when they're not at school. And we acknowledge the extreme difficulty with that in a lot of cases, but we feel like as much as possible keeping schedules in place and regular times to check in as much as possible. Again, that will look different depending on the different grade levels. The other way of showing that they've been in attendance is to show that they've engaged in learning that day. So that means signing into whatever platform it might be, Google, Zern, whatever the other options might be, and just completing whatever the assigned tasks are. And this time around, we will be doing scores for report cards as we would in any other normal year. Teachers will be using evidence of learning from class and from remote learning. We're really working hard to think through what the accountability is for students. The other thing that we acknowledge, especially speaking for some of our older students, was a lack of accountability in some cases in the spring, and as a result, paired with just the time of year we lost some of our students on a regular basis being connected and really being part of the learning process. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. There will be a lot of opportunities for discussion around accountability, but grades will be provided this time around on report cards. And of course, most important at the very end of this is that this plan is likely to change. What we know is that our information from, or the guidance from the state is changing, feels like frequently, and we are working to adjust our plan as we see fit to align with those guidelines and to make sure that we're continuing to focus on our students and their health and safety and our health and safety of our staff moving forward.
Jeremy, Lydia, thank you for the outline and the guideline. I know it's a lot of work. We truly appreciate it. At this time, let's open it up for the board for questions and discussion. So feel free to ask what you want.
Check. Just from like a logistical standpoint, will laptops stay at home or will they stay with students at school? How is that going to work?
So we are going to be working out a clear process over the next couple of weeks around what that will look like, but Chromebooks will be traveling back and forth with students who need them at home. There will be that option. What we've batted around is a kind of basic idea around it will be just a compact or an agreement that we are asking students and families to sign to work on taking care of that while they're at home. The challenge, of course, is safely getting the Chromebook home and remembering it the next morning and getting it back to school when you need to come back, because we do have devices assigned to each of our students. We fully expect that to be a bumpy process, but we also know that in order to allow remote learning to work, we need to provide the access to that technology at home to families.
So if we kind of go back to the beginning of the document, I have a few questions about masks and screenings. So going back to that part, it mentioned that screeners need to be trained by a school nurse before conducting a screening. Is that just for teachers and staff, or is that for parents as well, since parents can be doing screenings at home?
The training was for staff here because of the, how to wear the PPE, what questions to ask, what's the protocol. We can absolutely, Louisa's been doing some amazing YouTube videos for our staff, so I'm volunteering her to do a YouTube video about how to do the screening at home. I will join you if you'd like. And she's collected a number of resources to support families at home around, identifying symptoms, when to keep your students home, when to contact, the nurses or the Jeremy or I with questions. So, but that specifically was for staff.
Thank you. So let's say a child comes into school with the checklist is clear, but they have a 100.0 fever. That passes the screening. Is there a plan to follow up with that student during the day, or what does that look like?
We have no plan to check in with that student unless they're developing symptoms throughout the day. And then we would check in. So as long as the student's presenting normally, they don't have the fever of 100.4, there would be no reason to keep checking in with them. But let's say they come back the next day and they have 100.2 or their temperature's going up, then we would have a record to show that we should keep an eye on the student because they may be developing symptoms.
Okay, so then that's good. So masks, we mentioned that there will be some masks provided for students, which is wonderful because while at baseball this summer, I heard one kid tell me that, well, I'm just not going to go to school because I don't have a mask. And I said, I think we're going to take care of that for you. But what type of variety, what will the inventory be? And I mean, there are going to be kids who every day show up without a mask. What is the plan for helping those students and not depleting our inventory at the same time?
So we have a inventory for school, like as a school supply. We also just received a donation of 400 masks that will be distributed to classrooms. So not only will like school, we'll have a school supply, classrooms will have a supply, and those are cloth masks. So can be reused, we can take them, we can wash them, and they can be redistributed to classrooms, as well as disposable masks as well. So our screeners will have disposable masks in the morning to provide to students who show up without them, as well as if there are families that or students we know do not have their own supply, we can give them a supply of cloth masks to keep. And as well as supplying, teachers will probably be the front line of knowing which students need a supply of masks, and that's when we would supply the cloth ones. But the disposable ones for students that show up, just forget it that day, or we see that they're about to take it out of their backpack with a bunch of other stuff in it, and that's not the same, that's not the clean, like their mask isn't clean, and so we don't recommend that they wear it all day. We'll provide them with a disposable one. So as of right now, I think we have quite a large supply of masks. And that's our plan.
Thank you. One last question in this kind of round. You mentioned multiple times following state guidelines. What about the guidelines that came out from the governor about 3 feet for the younger children?
Yeah, I'm gonna pass that to Dr. Ruka.
So I'm glad you brought that up. We did get that guidance on Tuesday of last week. The task force and Lydia and Jeremy had prepped the document for our board meeting, which goes into the folder on Thursday. So it didn't make sense to revamp what we were doing. What I will also say, and we were unanimous as we discussed this as a task force on Tuesday, we are not comfortable simply reopening for all students for pre-K 5 with the 3 to 6 feet adjustment. I will speak personally. All the research that I have done has indicated, and the words that I am attentive to in the research around children, especially children under 10, are 2 words: less likely. It does not mean that they are not going to transmit it. And it does not mean that it is not going to go from those children potentially to our adults. And as Jeremy said earlier, we have a responsibility not only to our students, but to the adults who work in this building and who are in our community. And so while we were certainly grateful to get updated guidance in a lot of places, that document has a lot of green in it, which means they've made some adjustments since the initial document was issued, I want to say, on June 15th or 16th. We are comfortable going slower, getting our protocols in place, and watching the data as it evolves both in our building and in the Northeast Kingdom. I think it's fair to say any gathering of children and adults brings with it a risk of transmitting this virus. And I don't think that any educator, when they were studying education, signed up to be a part of that risk. That said, we have all 170 of our staff members returning on Wednesday, and they are ready to get after it and rebuild relationships and begin to welcome our children back into this building as safely as possible.
So just to build on that, 6 feet is also just less risk. Given that this COVID is not the only virus that's out there, if you're going to not follow the lower guidelines, at what point in time will you adjust to a lower guideline? Or, I mean, you have to have a set point. The choice to move to a lower guideline can't be arbitrary then. And so what are your criteria for doing that? If it's when we're the last school standing, that's probably not a good choice. But as someone in the medical field, I can tell you there's never a time with no risk for infection. So what's the plan for when you will make that decision to move to 3 feet?
We don't have a specific plan for that at this point. It would be something that would be considered in conjunction with Louisa, who's the coordinator of our reopening task force, as well as with the data in the Department of Health in the Northeast Kingdom. We are going to put as much as we can into reopening with protocols at the 6-foot distance mark. We'll assess after a month, we'll assess after 2 months. If we feel that it's safe to move to the lower threshold, it will be certainly something that would come to the board, but it would be in consultation not only with Louisa, but with the folks from the Department of Health, given the data in the Northeast Kingdom.
Okay, but the Department of Health did come out with a 3 to 6 foot guideline, because Mark Levine has signed on to the 3 to 6 foot guideline.
We understand that.
Okay. So
we're going to be looking at cases in the Northeast Kingdom, looking at how cases are evolving, if there are clusters that are evolving. One of the things that I will be honest with you, that we are wary of is the fact that we can't control what parents and families do with their children when they're not here. This whole notion of going to a county that's only green is essentially being done on the honor system. In the same way, and I will be totally candid, we're careful about what our adults are doing as well. So we can control what's happening here. We'll be mindful of cases here. Hopefully we don't have any. I think the reality is we expect that there will be some, because we are bringing a lot of people into close contact into a building. Excuse me. And so we're going to watch the data not only here, but in other area schools and in the Northeast Kingdom.
all right. So then you'll be reporting us out at a month what our numbers are looking like, what our infectivity looks like, and then having a plan based upon that information?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess this is maybe a side to the previous question. I think the guidance was pretty clear that they didn't want the change in for the pre-K to 5 to derail current plans. There was a sort of aside in the document that talks about a hybrid learning model, and how that if the wheels were sort of moving in that direction, to take note that not be derailed. It also gives the schools an opportunity to again assess the situation. But it is also very clear in the guidance that the state is urging a 5-day-a-week program for those children. And so it is going to be an incredibly fine line to walk. So I guess there's not a question in there. It's just that's how I read the guidance. And I, again, look forward to an update, because it is very clear in the guidance that is the direction that the state is moving to at this moment in time, which who knows where that mark's going to be. So I had a question as well about that, but I think it's sort of been discussed. So the second question I have for you and for the team is the promotion of outdoor learning and the importance of supporting that in nature-based education. So I'm specifically looking at, have any nature classrooms been set up? How are you sharing best practices amongst the staff? Because I think in the past there's been a real, there's some teachers that do it really, really well, and there's some teachers that not naturally just, that isn't their inclination to go outside. So how do we create equity within our classrooms for that experience? Because it is going to be important, I think. And I know if you look around the state, there's been some really amazing things that other small schools have been able to do. And so what do those best practices look like, and where can we take what they've been able to do in a small school with a lot more resources, and how does that translate to our school? Is there any, just do you comment on that, or, yeah?
So there have been no outdoor classrooms set up yet because our staff don't come back to work until Wednesday. And we have in service with them until Tuesday, and then there's work time. We have heard from a great number of staff members who are interested in getting outside and doing outdoor classroom and nature-based learning. Jeremy and Patrick have been working on on the outdoor spaces that we have beyond the field. We've worked with Abby Thomas, our tech director, to make sure there are Wi-Fi extenders on the outside, like at the outside of the building. So if they're doing, if they need any sort of technology or Wi-Fi for that learning, that they are able to access it. We're figuring out not just how to schedule, play structures, but also spaces outside, so that maybe like the 6th grade has access to this section over by the tennis courts, and the 8th grade has access to, this section over here, so that they actually have a space where they can set up their learning, and it feels like there's an extension of their classroom. A lot of those conversations will come out of the work that teachers are doing together after in-service. So we haven't started, but we do have a lot of expertise amongst the building and within the building, and people are, as Brian said, like ready to like hit the road running and getting those things set up. So we're doing our best to make sure the logistics and the space is available routinely and consistently for outdoor learning. I think the key to some of the examples, I guess we're really focused on that because, as you mentioned, there are a lot of small schools that are able to do some amazing things, and we are just not a small school. And so we are still trying to figure out how do we provide access to space so that they can really feel like it's an extension of their classroom, and not like that they've got to change spots every time they go outside because there's 5 other classrooms out there. So that's about as far as we've gotten in the planning, but we really look forward to seeing what teachers are coming up with and how we can support them in this new venture as we get back to work.
This is related to a fully remote option. I know that a lot of other districts, and I'm wondering why we're not able to offer a fully remote option to families. It would decrease the class size. It'd be an option for families that concerns about safety for in-person learning. Not all families should and can homeschool. They're taking on a huge financial, legal, and organizational risk for their families by taking on a fully homeschool. It's a contract essentially with the state of Vermont, and not to be taken lightly. And I'd like to see them have at least some sort of taxpayer-funded support in a process for fully remote learning for options for families.
We were questioning whether or not we would have the staff to offer a fully remote learning option. And in the surveys that we had sent out, it was a very small percentage of folks indicated that would be something that they were interested in the early portions of this planning process. So given the fact that we had offered, and we are, the greatest number of concerns that we got was the fact that we were not going to be offering 5 days in person. So we put a lot of our efforts into a robust hybrid program, where, as Mr. Ross said, there will be flexibility given to each team as to how that remote portion looks. So each team from pre-K all the way up, I'm sorry, pre-K is not having a remote option, but from kindergarten all the way up will determine how the remote option will work. For some teams, it may be that all teachers are doing both in person and are doing remote. For some teams, a core are going to do in person and a core are going to do remote. But given the feedback that we got from the surveys that we sent out, there were very, very few who were asking for a fully remote option. And so we put our efforts into a hybrid at this point.
I think the other piece that we just have to, that we kept in mind as we were making the decision around what the options would be, is really what can we expect from teachers in this process without putting them in a position where they're completely overwhelmed and overloaded. And they're already there. I mean, to be candid, I think that anybody who's in education in the spring was in a situation where, with the challenges of trying to teach remotely during that time, wholly unprepared for that experience, it was a daily challenge in a lot of ways, and that looked very different depending on the grade level. The reality as we come back is that challenge still exists. So teachers are in a position where they are teaching in person and also managing online or remote instruction and remote learning for students, and that is an incredibly difficult task to take on simultaneously. We batted around the ideas of having a couple of staff at each grade level who was responsible for remote learning and a couple who were in person. The reality of doing that really undoes any benefit of having a hybrid model where we don't have all of our students here all the time. Our numbers just creeped back up to a point where we weren't able to meet the 6 feet within a classroom. So I think that knowing that you know we're in a very fortunate position where we do have primarily all of our staff coming back this year, and I know that's because of their dedication to the students of the St. Johnsbury School. I also hope that it's because they feel like we're setting the school up to be safe and healthy and to have a successful restart this fall. Knowing all of those pieces, I know that we need to be very thoughtful about how we or what we ask of our staff that are already have already taken a lot of their summer to think this through, who are already putting a lot of effort into thinking about what this is going to look like at their grade levels, and being aware that teachers who are overwhelmed and overloaded are not going to be able to do their best for our students for the course of the school year. And at this point, we're all expecting this to be kind of for the long haul. So just keeping that in mind, I think it's important that we've approached this process and put in place the options for our families that are differentiated in some ways. We're acknowledging that some of our families have very different needs for health reasons and others, and we're being thoughtful about connecting individually with families that need that support. But in general, we have a process moving forward that really allows us to provide the best education for our students that we can.
Can you speak, a completely different subject, can you speak to the substitute pool and how we're going to deal with substitute teachers?
So our plan is we actually have a surprising number of subs returning this year. And we are working on a process with Diane Morey, who is our sub coordinator, to assign subs to different grades so that as our different cohorts, so as they're coming in, we know that they're not if we need subs all week, that they're not going from, first grade to 8th grade to 6th grade, as we're doing everything we can to limit the, intersection of grades. And so we're working on a system with them to assign them to different cohorts.
I think Jeremy's point was really important, and I wanted to make sure that I acknowledged that, because I think at the heart of why I was asking about a remote learning option is a fear that we were expecting teachers to be in a classroom and providing the support to children who are at home learning, in the classroom learning, and whether or not a dedicated team. And so it sounds like you guys have worked through that and put, in your big sort of checkerboard of all the different, move those pieces around. And I assume it'll just continue to move around as things move forward.
So you may not be able to answer this question that I have. It's more of a comment, I suppose. But right now we're in phase step 2 with the state. And I know things are moving really quickly with this. Heck, in March we closed down at the snap of a finger. So if we move from step 2, phase 2 to 3, I'm guessing that 3 looks like Dean's question, 3 feet spacing or so. That plan would have to come to fruition pretty quick if they move to step 3, because the state's kind of setting us up to change things for more kids. I'm not sure if you have a plan for 3 feet spacing, and how would that plan look in terms of daily schedules, more kids in the building, obviously. How do you accommodate that? Does it go to full regular instruction, so on and so forth? Probably would require a lot of planning, but it is planning as a insurance contingency policy that may have to take place pretty quickly and be instituted really quickly. So if you haven't done that yet, I recommend keeping that in the front of your mind.
It's a fair question, and it's not, we haven't even had a chance to meet as a task force since that guidance came out. When we met on Tuesday, it was to prep the document for the board meeting for tonight. We discussed that we had heard rumblings that this new recommendation for 3 to 6 feet was going to be coming out, and we'll be discussing that, excuse me, the next time that the task force sits down. The other reason that we're staying with the model of 6 feet and doing a hybrid situation is to allow us to see how the protocols work. So exactly what you just said, we're going to be able to see what it looks like when we have half of our students and all of our adults come to the building on Tuesday, September 8th, and really judge, is this going to work if we immediately go to step 3 and we have to essentially double the number of students that'll be coming in. So it's, while it certainly is not something that we've discussed thoroughly, it is something that we are going to be mindful of as we go forward, and it's something the task force will be looking at in our future meetings.
Way back to bathrooms. The stalls have physical walls, do they not? I don't understand why you need to close down 2 between when you've got a physical wall. It's a better barrier than an actual face mask. And because you're actually, because this is proving not to be spread by surface spread as much as by airborne spread, why limit yourself to 2 stalls and double the length of the bathroom break?
Well, just, to put it in context, we're also thinking about, 2nd to 8th graders in the bathroom, who there may be a physical wall there, but as soon as they leave the stall, they're still practicing distancing themselves, and the bathroom is usually a very social time for kids. So we're trying to streamline it so it is much less a place of congregation, and you go in, you use it, and you leave. There were recommendations with the guidelines around limiting the number of students, and we do recognize that it's going to take a little bit longer, but we actually hope that it will be somewhat faster since we are limiting the number of students and providing more supervision, so it's limiting the amount of social time in the bathroom. Which, if you haven't spent much time in middle school recently, is a little shocking. But as yeah. But as as it says, the plan is subject to change. So if we're finding that they're taking way too long and that we can actually fit 5 kids in the bathroom at a time safely, then we will adapt and we will go. We have to be flexible and nimble and adjust while still being conservative to make sure that we're not putting anyone's safety at risk.
Or just to tack on to what Lydia was saying too, boys and girls bathrooms are different, and so while we're blocking off a couple of stalls in the girls' room, we're not in the boys because there aren't as many, but there are urinals that don't provide that sort of space in between, and so we are blocking off some of those again to prevent as many students from being in the bathroom for social reasons, and also because there isn't the same ability to really be that distance apart from each other when they're in there. So, and the key to this will be really supervision from adults who are available to be there to help guide students in and out of the bathroom and make sure that it's happening as quickly as possible.
Sorry, taking a deep breath. I really appreciate all the work that's been done, and I appreciate the need to not derail plans that have been in place. And 4 weeks from when something is talked about to the governor to the first day of school is a lot longer than we've had for changes that we've need to make in the past. So I'm I feel some tension in there, but I respect the decision. So I wanted to explain my body language. But I would like to shift the conversation, if we could, to academic discussion.
Yeah, I just want to name that we want to do what's best for our students, but also make sure our staff feel comfortable as well. And so we are looking to really learn from the opening that we're doing and make sure everyone feels confident and comfortable and safe. We do not want to end up in a situation where we're putting staff members in a situation where they don't feel safe or they're worried and they don't return to work. The last thing we'd want is to lose a bunch of our staff members or to create a space where they didn't feel safe or that we weren't doing best for them or our students. And one of the models that or an experience that Louisa was able to connect with in Sweden or Switzerland, they talked about how they did a soft opening, and so they went slower at first, and it built everyone's confidence so that when they did open fully, everyone was fully on board. They knew what they needed to do and how to keep everyone safe, and so we really want to model that so that we are doing what we're doing and doing it really confidently. So we do realize that 4 weeks is a long time, and everybody wants kids in school, but we also want to make sure that we are doing it confidently and safely. And now let's talk about academics.
Yeah, academics. So, lots here too. Will children, and I know that you've already said that there will be opportunities and that it will vary by grade level. Okay, so I know that you've addressed that. But will children be responsible for new learning while they're at home during their remote time, regardless of grade level?
No, our hope is that, our goal is that the remote learning is remote application of the learning that they're doing while in person. That may look different depending on the unit, the subject, the grade, but introducing new content remotely is not best practice from what we found for our grade levels. So we are trying to prioritize new content being taught in person and remote learning application, so that they are putting it into practice and kind of exploring and working with the concept from there.
What will Unified Arts look like this year?
So our Unified Arts will travel from classroom to classroom, and we are working with a beast of a schedule, let me tell you. But we are, I think we have found a way to provide at least a much more equitable or equal balance of access to UArts for our students. So we'll be working with the UArts team to make sure that happens, but in terms of safety, they'll be traveling from, the adults will be going to classes or live streaming into classes with the support of a classroom para for the younger grades, depending on the teacher's health needs. But they will have access to it, and for most of them have pretty equal access depending on their cohort.
To just kind of go along with UArts, other questions I suspect will be asked around our music program and our theater arts program. We know that Caitlin Bryan and Heather Joy are putting a lot of thought into how to provide students access to chorus and band and theater in this environment. It will not look the same. They're going to continue to do lessons for band, probably virtually. So on kids' remote days, they'll be able to participate in the lessons with Heather. They're still both hoping to keep things in place like jazz band after school outside as much as over the beginning of the year as we can keep that in place and then transition to something else, whatever that might look like. And same with theater in some way. Their association or state association has put a lot of thought into recommendations around how to keep these programs in place for kids. Bottom line is we know that for many of our students, our performing and physical arts are things that bring them to school and engage them in things that they enjoy when they're here. We are really committed to making sure those stay in place. They're going to have to look different. The middle school will not have a block for band and chorus this year in the schedule, at least to start the year, because we just can't put 100 kids on stage. And, that was a couple days a week, close to that for chorus. And so we just need to be thoughtful about that. We can't put kids in a room together playing instruments, but we can think of other ways to engage them in that experience and to also hopefully not lose ground. Heather and Caitlin have put a lot of work into their programs over the last few years. We want to make sure that when we are back to normal, because we are going to be at some point in the future, we want to make sure that program continues to produce the experiences and opportunities for our kids that it has been.
May I? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go anyway. So when you were talking about remote and varies by grade level, will there be baseline expectations set? What could that be looking like? Just some questions about that. And then what supports are there going to be during these first couple of weeks for teachers around scaffolding, differentiation, low floor, high ceiling type activities and instruction?
So in terms of baseline guidelines, baseline expectations, we'll be following the AOE's guidelines around the number of instructional hours for different grade levels. So each grade level will be given a set of there's a set of weekly cumulative hours for a week that the AOE is recommending. We are going to kind of figure out how many hours do they get in person and how many hours does that mean that we have to provide students remotely. So that it increases as the students get older, but that will set the baseline expectations for work outside of the classroom and what type of the amount of learning or access to instruction or support through the remote learning application they have access to on those days. And that will be shared with families, with the whole plan of this is how many hours we're expecting, this is what the work looks like, this is how you access it, here's how you find it, this is how you contact us, and that will be all shared with families. And then, what was the second part of your question?
Scaffolding, differentiation, low floor, high ceiling, supports for teachers, because they're really going to have.
Yeah. So there's, that's something that we talk about, that's something that we work on with our teachers and our staff, no matter what the year looks like. This year we are jumping. So we're really trying to refine and deepen our professional learning communities this year, and that's where a lot of that differentiation and scaffolding and data-informed practices will come from. So we are revamping with this is going into a much longer answer than you probably anticipated, but to make sure that our teachers are in a professional learning community where they can look at data, look at where their students' skills are, with their gaps, be able to brainstorm and work together to really define what that scaffolding can look like for those students, what their activities can look like, how to access all learners in their classroom with a really strong community, and that's data informed. So that's kind of our long-term plan, and that's our goal no matter what the year is, and that's, speaking on behalf of the leadership team, that's how we plan to dive into that as well, because we really do need to know where our students are and how to address it, and there's no better way than to do it with other educators and to have a professional working team.
The only piece I'd add to that is that we are fortunate enough to have other positions too that will be able to support teachers when needed. We have our instructional coaches and our interventionists, and again, I think the collective wisdom of each team, which includes special educator or special educators, staff that focus specifically on behavior. I regularly reflect on how lucky we are that we have as many support positions in this school as we do to support our students and the many needs that they bring to us each day, and that will be more important this year than probably ever before. So it's really thinking about, and that's what the next few weeks are going to be about, really thinking about how to connect what's happening in the classroom with the other staff in the building who are part of our support system to make sure that we're addressing those needs in the best way that we possibly can.
Just curious where things stand with sports. I assume we'll have soccer, and just wondering, will that look different, or what will that look like?
Yeah, fall sports are being allowed by the AOE or the governor and the VPA. So we will have soccer. Soccer is an outside sport, so there shouldn't be, there aren't as many regulations around that as there might be for other sports. Students will be expected to wear masks at all times, as are the guidelines, and we'll make sure that we're clear on like the limit. I think that I saw the last guideline said 150 for audience or parents who are in attendance to watch. And again, we're lucky we can spread out pretty well on the field if you're here watching a soccer game. If you've been here before, Tom, you obviously have been. As far as moving into winter, I don't think that anybody really knows what the future holds for winter sports at this point. Our hope is that we are continue to be able to provide that opportunity for students around basketball, but we also know that it's pretty clear at this point that our gyms really aren't able to be used for any kind of activity that is physical in nature. So I have a lot of skepticism that we'll see basketball played this year, but we'll wait for more information from the VPA and from the governor.
Thank you. All right, so, okay, last question. Thank you.
That I thought was reflected in the guidance was staggered arrivals. Is this something you just haven't?
Yeah, so we'll work with the bus company. The bus drop off is already staggered by nature, and they're working on how to just make it as a part of the natural routine of when they drop off kids, as well as, you know, if let's say we do have 3 buses show up at one time, they will not all let the students out at one time. They'll let one bus go, then the next bus go, then the next bus go. So the, Butler's bus has been amazing, working with us to make sure they're implementing all the protocols and that they know what for parents drop off. So it will also be kind of staggered by nature because you're being screened in your car. So you'll be coming out one at a time. The only staggered drop off that may be in place is for pre-K because you're parking your car and walking your student to the door. You're in the loop, so a screener will come up, screen while you're in the car, then you can go out. Then they go to the next car, screen, you go out. Next car, screen. So you're not pulling up to the loop and just letting your kids out. Someone's coming, saying, okay, once they get the sticker, they can come. So staggered by nature and the practice procedure.
We recognize, just to keep our theme from previous years, that our front circle of doom, or whatever it's been referred to as the past, and back loop are going to probably be more of a traffic issue for us this year, especially to start the year, as again, we're hopeful that more of our families will transport their students to school, and we know that traffic is going to be really difficult. So we are, there's no clear plan at this point of how exactly we're going to address that, because it's honestly kind of a moving target at the moment. We will certainly work to provide any kind of traffic support that we can. We're also pushing our attendance back to 8:15, so that will allow students to arrive over a longer period of time. Doors open at 7:30. Attendance is 8:15, so instead of really a 25-minute window, it's more of a 45. And if we realize that we're still not getting all of our students in the building by 8:15 and traffic is crazy, then we will push that out further. The issue is not to force attendance as early as possible. It's to make sure that everybody's arriving safely. At the same time, being aware that we want to make sure that we're able to start school at a reasonable time, and that we know that morning meeting or advisory is such an important part of the day. We want our students to all be here when we start that.
All right, at this point, I'd like to open up questions to the public. So if anybody here in the audience has any questions, yes, now your time, and then we'll alternate with the YouTube audience after that.
First and foremost, I just want to say that I think the job you all are doing is incredible. I think I speak for probably many members of this community when I say it seems like an impossible task that you have somehow put together a 12-page pamphlet and made it seem simple, so thank you. I have a couple questions concerning siblings. So we have 2 children that are going to be coming to school, hoping that they're in the same cohort. And my question is, if my son shows up with a temperature, he's caught a cold somewhere, or he's showing symptoms, does that sort of default, is my daughter also coming home? Even if she's asymptomatic?
So just the first thing is, if you have multiple students in the building, they will definitely be in the same cohort. Okay. So rest assured they'll be in the same cohort. Second is, if your other child is not showing any symptoms, they will not be sent home. It will not be defaulted. Unless there's a confirmed case, and then you'll work with Louisa, who's our COVID coordinator, to check your symptoms, talk to your provider, to figure out the best case and the best way to approach quarantining for your family. Yeah, okay.
So, and I think that Jeremy talked to this point, that we recognize that children will be sent home for sometimes just a cold. Unfortunately, that's what we have to do in order to keep everyone safe, to keep students or staff with symptoms out of the building. But your other child would not be sent home. And then we would recommend that for the child with the fever, you be in touch with your provider to determine whether or not they need to be tested. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I just have two more, hopefully, easy questions. I know Dr. Ricca mentioned that there was no immediate plan to begin discussing the 3-foot rule, I guess. Will the community or parents have any input on that, given that, the questionnaires that were sent out just a few weeks ago, that were asking for our commitment to the school and what our plans were for the year, were really based off of what the current social distancing plan was at the time?
So I think there's not we haven't started talking about a 3-foot guideline and how that will work, but I think it'll be a really natural part of the conversation as teachers are setting up their classrooms and, before students even get here, and then as they're here, to really figure out, if we went to a 3-foot guideline, how would they function? How would they move about the classroom? Could we make it work? Would it feel somewhat like a classroom and not like a room with desks and chairs and you're not allowed to move all day type of situation? So I think that conversation will just naturally happen amongst staff, and then we'll be able to take the experience that they have in their classroom and navigating it, setting it up, and then navigating it with students to then inform that conversation. And then, like everything that we have done so far, we'll absolutely reach out to our community and our families to see what feels best for them, and then how can we kind of mesh that with the guidance that we're getting to create a safe learning experience. So I would imagine yes. Brian's shaking his head behind me. Jeremy's shaking his head next to me. So
awesome.
And to reiterate, the community elected the school board, and the administration works for the community. So the community has 100% input, and all you have to do is contact any school board member and send us an email, and I can assure you that your questions and concerns would be brought forward to the administration.
Awesome. I think this is my last one, and it might be a little more complicated because I know not everybody is in this situation, and I'll just speak from a place of, where my family is at with our work schedules. We have been on occasion forced to leave the state to maintain any kind of financial viability within our home. And that may become something that happens during the school year. And when you're saying if a parent leaves the state to go to work in a yellow or a red zone, which hopefully doesn't have to happen, but if it does, are you asking the parent and the 2 children, or in our case, 2 children, to quarantine? Or is it the parent, or is it what does that look like?
There's actually, we were discussing that, the superintendents, and I have an email response that I think will help you.
I'm going to pass my mic to Dr. Ricca.
We literally were just discussing this as NEK superintendents today, and one of my fine colleagues, Emily Nisley, who is the superintendent of Blue Mountain and is recently a resident of the St. Johnsbury School District, so her 2 young men will be attending school here, was able to pull this, and I will share this guidance with everybody. People who live near the Vermont border and regularly travel to and from a neighboring state may make day trips to Vermont for work, healthcare, and other essential needs like groceries or visitation for parent and shared custody without quarantining. And that's from the Vermont Department of Health.gov. And so if you send me if we exchange email, I'll get this to you tonight so that you can have this as well.
I just wanted to add that 211 is a really great resource for some of these complicated questions about travel, about what your spouse, they're traveling. So they're really helpful if you've got something that doesn't quite fit that perfectly.
I would just add on too. I think the basis for your question is really an ask that we have from the school to our community is really to work together to be thoughtful about what it is that we need to do. And I think that we're relying on the your best decisions as families, just like we're relying on ourselves to make the right or the best decisions. I'm not sure there's always a right one. And same with our staff. There are so many variables in the situation for people who are traveling, family members who are in different places, children who are mixing with different students when they're outside of the school, still playing sports or doing other activities that create that opportunity to be around other people who they may not normally be around. I think that it really comes back to if we're going to be as successful as we can with this and put ourselves in a position where we are able to get to a full reopening as quickly as possible, it's really about working together as a full school community. And I have no doubt that that's the way that we're going to be able to approach that. I think that we've seen over the last few months our school community really wrap around this, and as challenging as it's been, there are a lot of really bright shining moments. And so I think that our request just to everybody involved, staff, leadership team members, families, other school community folks who are in and out of the building, just to be thoughtful about thinking this through the best that you can and making the best decision that you can. Because at the same time, we also want to make sure that kids are experiencing their education and not being put in a situation where they're not able to be here all the time.
Do we have any YouTube questions?
We don't at this time. The one question that came through via email was about a staggered start, and it was from Jen Fisher, and she says she's on about a 10-minute delay, so she expects to hear the answer shortly. But I've told her if she needs to get more information, I'd be happy to follow up with her about the staggered start.
Do we have any? Well, okay. Let me just ask the audience for a couple of questions.
Okay. So back to academics real fast. So a few quick questions that I'll try to group together, and they can be answered individually or whatever. How are we going about choosing high leverage concepts that we will teach versus the ones that we won't teach? What is the priority? How are they being prioritized? How is that going to be communicated with families? How does all of this fit with proficiency-based learning and grade level expectations? It's my understanding, I could be wrong, that special education, you can't qualify based on COVID. You had to be there before. What is the plan to discern between what's happened because of COVID versus a need of a student? How long is that period? What does that look like? And yeah, that's it. There you go. That was a lot. Sorry.
No sweat. I'm going to answer the last one first because I think it might be my easiest answer. I'm not really sure that I have a clear answer on that. And Kara Lufkin, who's our special ed director, would probably be better equipped to really help us think through that process. It is certainly a challenge that we recognize is going to be one that we have to do some work around, because the reality is that all or most, at least, of our students are going to be coming back with some gaps that wouldn't normally exist. And to think about how to to provide them with the best education that they need based on where they are is something that we'll be putting a lot of time into as teachers and students are both back in the building together. Your first questions were around how will we determine which high leverage practices, and that connects with what your second question was, which will really be using the proficiencies for each of the content areas and within each of the grade levels, working together as grade level teams or content teams, depending on which part of the school you're thinking about, with the support of our content leadership teams, our instructional coaches, Jody Elliott, who's our director of learning design, really walking through what our proficiencies are and which are the ones that they all align from grade level to grade level, which are the ones that we need to be focused most on during this time. And I think that starting out, it's really going to be about looking back at what was expected to be part of instruction last spring that didn't get in. So an example was just that I had a conversation with one of our fourth grade math teachers the other day, and she was talking a lot about really starting with fractions at the beginning of fourth grade, where that's really something that usually is in the curriculum at the end of third grade. It's likely that they didn't get that to the same level, not because the third grade teachers didn't put time and effort into having that as part of the instruction, but because of the nature of what the spring looked like. That's something that fourth grade math will spend some time starting the year on, and making sure they're getting in place those foundational pieces at their grade level that they'll need to build off of to determine the content or the curriculum for the remainder of the year.
Yeah. We also, before we officially closed the school year, our grade teams met with the grade below and the grade above to talk about where they're able to end in their curriculum, in their scope, like their curriculum, so that the incoming, the sending, and the receiving grades had an idea before they went off into the summer of kind of the needs of the students that they were receiving. We've also had a number of professional development opportunities over the summer, in the spring, and coming up. So we'll be working really closely. Two of our coaches went and were trained in using Fontes and Pinnell and bringing that back and doing deep dives into PD and PLCs for our staff, as well as we've been working really closely, and we'll continue that with all learners for math. And they are an amazing organization that really does map out what the high leverage concepts are for math across all grades and how they connect. So in terms of math, we'll be specifically looking at those to make sure, like Jeremy said, if you're having fourth graders come in, what are the high leverage concepts that they need from third grade to be able to access the fourth grade curriculum? So we have so many people in the building. We have amazing resources here, but we're also working with professional development outside of the school.
I agree. I wanted to echo you. I think you guys have done a great job putting this all together, which is really helpful. I also want to thank you for bringing sports back as well, because the mental health of our children are significant right now, and being able to have that opportunity and seeing kids out on the ball field and parents being able to engage is something that absolutely needs to happen. So I appreciate that as well. I wanted to ask in regards to, I have actually several questions, but so starting out for the first 6 weeks of school, in the school, 2 days, 1 week, 3 days the following week, what is that going to look like for kids that are at home? Because the whole point of that 6-week model is relationship building, going over norms. What are kids going to be expected to do when they're sitting at home?
That's a really excellent question. I don't have a specific answer, but I do just want to give you an insight to how Jeremy and I have been talking with our staff about thinking about the upcoming year, to reframe it from kind of the loss of time that you have with students to how to kind of think about the opportunities and the different way you can structure opportunities with students. So I imagine that they are already starting to think about, how do I connect with that student on that off day? Like Jeremy said, do we live stream our morning meeting so every student has an opportunity to be a part of that specific time during the day for community building? Is it, scheduling one-on-one Zoom calls, emails, phone calls, so that you're talking with that student? But just thinking outside of the box of what the traditional setting in which you build a relationship with a student and their family is. So not a specific answer, but just kind of the framing, and I'm going to pass it to Jeremy.
I think the other piece of that is that we also know that all of those first 6 week things don't happen content free, right? So it's not that there's not instruction happening and that there's learning that's not happening. So there'll still be the opportunity for teachers to be doing instruction, doing assessment, thinking about where the learning is going to go, and that work will undoubtedly be coming home as part of that application process on the remote learning days, but not not without also the classroom community building process happening. That it certainly acknowledged the challenge that it's going to be really hard to keep the momentum of that happening when we're having our kids in our school every other day, and that certainly is a piece of this that's going to be tricky, and I think it's something that advocates for encouraging students to connect from home as much as possible for a morning meeting and other activities that are happening throughout the day. But speaking especially, I think for our older students, the instruction and learning and specific content and expectations are in place from week one on a normal school year, and that won't be different this year necessarily. It's just going to feel different because we're not going to have the same momentum that we would normally have. I hope that made some sense.
Will you be constantly assessing that process and maybe adjusting that? Because it just seems like 6 weeks, 3 days a week, sitting at home, being engaged in the morning only, and then...
Yeah, and I actually, Joy, I would say that what you just said is probably a really important piece of everything that we're doing moving forward, is that, we're answering these questions tonight and putting out this plan tonight and, sharing with our community and with our staff something that we don't really know what it's going to look and feel like when our kids are actually back in the building. And so we're doing our best to make those predictions and be prepared for whatever it might look like. But we would certainly not be following through with our responsibilities if we were not continually reflecting on how it's going, assessing whether or not we needed to make some different decisions, and then adjusting along the way. What day one or week one of school this year looks like will certainly not be what week 5 or 6 look like, when we're going to be making changes as we need to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our students at different grade levels, within different classrooms, and certainly in different parts of the school.
Will you be expecting teachers or even administration to relay to parents what those days are going to look like prior to school starting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I also want to add that just because that's the focus for our first 6 weeks doesn't mean there won't be any academic expectations during that time. It'll be a time really focused on how do you set up your schedule on those remote learning days. Our school counselors are already thinking about how do we support families to think about to set up schedules. Who do you reach out to if you're having trouble helping your student engage? Just kind of troubleshooting what remote learning would look like. So it won't. There will be some academic expectations, but the priority will be on setting up the routines, getting everyone familiar with the procedures and the protocols, as well as having the ability to flex, to slow down if more relationship building needs to happen before you move faster with the academic expectations, and just kind of move with the pace at which your class is going. So I don't want you to think that there will that they can log in the morning and then they have no other expectations for the rest of the day. We're going to make sure that teachers are communicating what the remote learning will look like, what the expectations are, how to communicate with them before school starts, and then kind of figuring out the quirks. Like Jeremy said, we're putting a plan together and we're not entirely sure how it's going to look. So we're allowing space for that to be figured out in the first 6 weeks.
So I'm also curious about what your guidance is going to be to teachers for IXL, Zern, Khan Academy, especially on remote days, because that was the go-to this past spring.
So can you you're asking like what programs
So-
are we like,
Are you giving any guidance to teachers around building their virtual learning platform? So are they flipping classrooms? Are they going to be only giving IXL instruction? Are they only going to be giving Zern instruction? What is that? Are they going to, videotape the instruction from the day before and have to go back and watch that? I mean, so hearing as a parent, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate where you guys are at. Absolutely. It's like uncharted waters. There's no question about it. But hearing, we're not really sure yet, makes me really concerned, right? So I'm just trying to get a guidance from you as the leaders of the school.
Yeah.
What are you giving guidance to teachers around the virtual learning? Because 9 times out of 10, they probably haven't had a lot of direct classes or learning about how to teach online, right? So it's very foreign, and I know teachers, I'm friends with lots of them, are trying to figure it out and put it all together.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, as the leaders of the school, what direction you're giving guidance to, or what you're...
So we're really diving into this remote learning application in terms of how are you providing access to instruction and remote instruction so that students can, what are you doing on your in-person days, and then what are the activities that you're having students access when they're not there, but still maintaining a high level of rigorous content or expectation during that time. So I think I know kind of what your fear is, and that's we're. And I don't know. I think I know what your fear is, and that's not what remote learning application looks like to either Jeremy or I or the leadership team. It doesn't look like spending those, 4 hours going from Zern to reading A to Z, then to IXL, then to watch the science video on Discovery Kids. That's not what remote learning application looks like to us. So we will be providing guidance that there is a good balance between who's doing where are the students getting the instruction from, how are the students demonstrating their own learning or doing their own level of work, as well as balancing the need for just some practice with if they're using Zern, or just the practice with reading A to Z, but that's not the only expectation, will be to practice. Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to be involved in the process. We don't want the days to just look like kind of practice, and that there's not a level of engagement or application or demonstration of learning that needs to be happening. And so that's really all I can say for right now.
But you'll be communicating with us
Absolutely.
prior to school as to what that's going to
Absolutely.
really
We
look
are,
like, and accept feedback and engagement from families
Yep,
around
yeah,
that
absolutely.
process.
We are really thankful for the extension of the start of the school year, so that teachers have that ability to be here and work together to and with us to finalize what those platforms will look like and what the expectations are, so that it is common amongst the grade and developmentally appropriate for the grade as well, which is really hard to do during the summertime. So we're really thankful for that time, and that's what we'll use it for.
I think that honestly, the expectations that teachers have for themselves around this are probably greater than anything that, use the word expectations, are greater than anything that either of us would ever put in place for our collective staff. The conversations that I've been part of or have overheard, or the information that's been brought to me are everyone is already putting a ton of thought into how to make this work and how to make sure that those remote days are as effective for our students as possible. The bottom line is that in asking our staff to teach in person and also be responsible for the remote learning at the same time, in some cases provides the opportunity for classes to be live streamed, or for kids to zoom into a class and participate live from home. And that makes a lot of sense. In other cases, it may not. And I think that we have to be really thoughtful about how are we, or what are we setting up that's going to work best for our students and be manageable for them and for our staff, so that we don't find ourselves, a handful of weeks into the school year really swamped and over our heads, and whatever we've attempted isn't working. So it goes back to we are going to use the next few weeks to really be thoughtful with our staff and come together to make sure that we're collaborating and sharing thinking and creating consistent plans for grade levels and parts of the school, and then really being thoughtful about how are we assessing whether it's working, and if it is, what do we want to keep in place, and if it's not working, then what do we need to change to make sure that it can continue to be more effective. Ultimately, this question and this line of conversation really gets at, we want our kids back in the building as soon as we possibly can, and that we know that we'll be able to best meet their needs when they're here, but we also want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that we can guarantee everybody's health and safety in the process, and not put ourselves in a position where we're being, disrupting the process like that happened last spring. So I think that's a really important question that you brought up, Joy. I think it's one that we need to give a lot more thought to, and it's also one that has been really hard for us as a leadership team to focus on without our staff surrounding us and being able to be part of the conversation.
I told you I have a lot of questions, I'm sorry. Thinking about an academic day, 2 days a week, typically kids will show up 7:45, 8 o'clock. By the time you screen them, get them in. When my kids did the Halo program up at the academy, the first day was like craziness, and they tweaked and they changed, right? So if we look at an academic day, and you include recess and you include lunch, your day's really whittled down to about 5.5 hours, right? Give or take. And you don't have transitions, which is nice, so that builds a little bit more instruction time. In hearing about the UArts piece being tied into their academic day, my kids have all been part of the UArts. I love the UArts program. I am a full supporter of the UArts program. I also wonder if you've taken into consideration having the UArts actually do it on the off days, so that way they're engaging kids that are at home. The band instruction and the choral instruction, actually it wasn't choral, but band instruction that my children received during the spring was phenomenal. And this would also give the opportunity for kids who are at home, who may not be receiving direct instruction because it's on one of those off days, to be engaged by a teacher. It allows the teachers to be able to see kids daily, right? And connect with them and build a structured hour of art class, of band class, of chorus, right? And it also then may free up even more space within your building to do whatever.
Yeah, I think that I agree with everything that you just said, and I think that a lot of our Unified Arts teachers are giving a lot of thought to how they can provide some opportunities for kids when they're at home. The other logistically piece of our schedule that causes some challenges in what your suggestion was is that the Unified Arts block is what provides the common planning time for our teachers to come together for team meetings, content meetings, the other pieces that are outlined in the planning time that's outlined in the master agreement between the teachers and the district. So it's not as simple as just pulling the Unified Arts out of the schedule. I think, though, that one of the benefits this year is that because there are less transitions, and then at the middle school level, just thinking about where your daughter is, Joy, we won't have the Catamount block mixed into the schedule because we can't do band and chorus this year. So that will get taken back into the schedule. So there will be longer instructional blocks this year, both because of that and because of the fact that students won't be transitioning. And however, also acknowledging that bathroom breaks are built in there, so that will eat up some of that time. And then the other piece is just thinking about, again, to what Lydia referenced earlier, which is the amount of time that students are required by the state to be involved in instruction or learning opportunities. That does come to about 5.5 hours. So we want to make sure that we're using that as effectively as we possibly can. We certainly want to acknowledge at the same time that the Unified Arts instruction is also an important part of that instruction for those students, and ties really closely with math and with language arts, and we want to make sure that that's an important part of our students' lives moving forward as well. So it's really going to be about thoughtfully thinking about how do we create schedules at all of our grade levels that allow for as much instruction as possible, knowing there's going to be a lot of interruptions because of masks and mask breaks and bathroom breaks and all those pieces. And it's going to take time for us to settle into routines that work for kids. And the amount of interruptions at the beginning of the school year will certainly be more than, hopefully, more than as we get into the year further and kids are able to sustain some of these new practices that we're putting in place.
I think I have two more. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. I appreciate your thought around what the question around being taught at home consistently 5 days a week. I don't recall it being, as a parent filling out the surveys, I don't recall that specific ask if it was tied to being able to pay for virtual learning. So if there was an opportunity for my tax money to be able to go to the Vermont virtual learning community and be able to teach the pod of kids that are forming around, there's lots of families that are forming these pods, that would also, again, free up space and things like that. So I don't know if that survey actually collected that type of data or thought process. Just a thought.
We didn't ask specifically about an all remote learning option because we didn't think that we would be able to staff an all remote learning option. And while we recognize that there are options in the state for furthering students' education, even to this point, the number of requests I have gotten are, even today, please reconsider, please have my children in school all 5 days. While there still may be families who are out there who are looking for a remote option, they haven't come yet to Jeremy or Lydia or me. That said, we will continue to evaluate as we go into the school year other opportunities for our students, and we want our students to be academically challenged. And if there are opportunities, we will certainly look into pursuing them to meet individual students' and families' needs.
I don't know if I would have come and asked that up to this point tonight, not hearing that question. So
okay.
I don't know if that was transparent. And then I just had a question from a parent wanting to know if a student needs to be quarantined or stay home somehow, will the school still maintain that student's education given that only new concepts will be learned in class and there are no remote options?
Yes, we will do our best to maintain the student's educational experience during that time. We will have to kind of flex that thought of that there is no direct instruction remotely when a student has to quarantine. So that could be the opportunity where classes are the class is live streaming the instruction, or the teacher is filming themselves one day and the student is watching that film the next day and having contact with the teacher to work through the work that's going on. So we'll have to change that policy because they're quarantining and they need access to their education. So what we'll say is yes, and we'll figure it out. I think it really does require kind of a case-by-case basis based on the grade and the expectation and the platform that the teachers have already set up, and what works best for that family too. Do they have access to internet? Do they have access to a device? How can we support them during that time based on what their needs are and what they have access to? But that will be our goal.
So I just want to thank you again. I know I threw out some tougher questions, but I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your reflection that you'll have on that, and I look forward to the transparency of what the next 4 weeks will bring.
All right, do we have any other questions out there in cyberspace for the board? All right, so we're going to move on. All right, so next discussion item is decision-making during the COVID-19 period. So the AOE put forth some guidance for school districts that we should describe our instructional dispositions through policy or administrative procedure. And as well, the VSBA said that school districts should consider adopting formal rules and procedures for implementing hybrid learning. The rules and procedures take the form of school board policy or administrative procedures as directed by the superintendent. So basically, they're asking us to put forward some sort of policy. And it can come in two forms. The school board delegates authority to the superintendent to make decisions related to the reopening. The VSBA's motto is great governance, and we just got this last week. So I know we've been doing this for the past month. Number two, the school board adopts policies to guide the superintendent's development of procedures necessary for school reopening. As well, we had another policy called district equity policy be put forth a week ago that districts should consider. I don't believe that we have this. So my question to the school board is, should we send this to the policy committee to work on quickly and bring it back to us for the board retreat meeting that we have on the 31st? Or should we look at it right now? Any thoughts? Keep in mind that we've already essentially delegated the authority to the superintendent thus far for the hybrid.
We're honestly supposed to. I mean, the mission of the school board is to make sure the school is run well and not to run the school.
So we can do it. We can run the school through policy, so the superintendent and the
right.
administrative
So
team go
I think
through
it's
policy.
I think it's fine to throw this to the committee to make sure it's comfortable, or they're comfortable with it. I particularly think the equity one needs to be looked at closely to make sure things really line up with our goals. But I'm fine with waiting, just because, like I said, I don't see that delegating authority for how we run the school is anything different than what we're actually instructed to do by the VSBA.
No, but the school world's run by policy and procedure, so this is yet another example. So how about we send it to the policy committee, and hopefully they can meet prior to the 31st, so we can get some information for the next board meeting, and they can chew on that. Does that sound like a plan, everybody? Yes, 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 yes. Moving on, location of the board retreat. So that is on August 31st, and so we also received some notice from the School Board Association in regards to school board meetings in the public setting here at the school. It's certainly a public setting. Now on the 31st for the board retreat, school's not in session. However, a week later, it is in session. So moving forward this fall, the location of future board meetings, I don't believe we can have it here at the school when it's in session, because basically the guidelines say restrict the amount of people going into the school. So I briefly spoke with Dean about that just prior to our meeting, and I sure wish there was some form of meeting we can do in public rather than hiding behind the computer screen, which I detest. That we could still meet face-to-face, and as well as any of the public who want to come, they would still have the option of YouTube. So I'm not super familiar with the St. J buildings around here. I don't know a lot of people, but perhaps anybody else would have ideas. And then to backtrack to the board retreat location, would it be okay to still have it here in the auditorium on the 31st, given that school is not in session, and would it be long gone before the school comes in session? So perhaps, Brian, you could answer the location question, and then anybody else can chime in about future meetings.
From my read of that message from the School Boards Association, I think it's okay to continue to have the retreat here, since we're already going to be bringing adults. All of our adults will be in the building at some form or another that day, our staff. So I think it's okay to keep the board retreat here as a location. And I would reach out and ask if there are other public locations in town that could accommodate us on Mondays at 6 o'clock as we start back into the school year. Because I was, I guess surprised was not the right word, but when in light of what the School Boards Association was saying, it does make sense that we don't want to bring members of the public. We want members of the public to participate in the meetings, but bringing them into the school space is essentially going against the guidance of not having non-essential school personnel in the school buildings.
You're more than welcome to use my building. We allow outside community to come in. We're following all COVID guidelines. We clean the building completely. I have a large gym space. I have 5 classrooms in there as well, so you're more than welcome to utilize the open space.
Well, which is that? Which place?
Schools out kind of on the outskirts of town, near Tim's Deli.
Okay, yeah, I know what it is. Yeah. Oh, that's great. That sounds great to me. So, thank you.
It is Wi-Fi capable. It's licensed. You're welcome to use the classrooms. I've offered that as well, so absolutely. More than welcome.
It's the Head Start building.
Thank you. So we certainly have about a month before we meet again in a public session. So hopefully, okay. Well, that sounds great. So, any comments before I move on?
I think they made it at the Welcome Center, but I also think they meet on Mondays at 6 o'clock. So are they the other Monday? Okay. All right. I'll reach out to Chad and I'll follow up with Joy and we'll figure something out. Sure. Okay. Mark, you and I'll work on that and you can throw some options out to the board.
Yeah, great. I'm glad because I will vomit if I have to go on Zoom again. All right. So action items. We do have a resignation, so we need to act on that. So I'm not sure if there's any comments or questions from the board. I believe you have the paperwork in your folder, so if you have any questions, comments, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on with the motion. Let's just keep fogging up. All right. I'd like to make a motion to accept the resignation of Amy Hornblass, who was a health educator here at the St. Johnsbury School, effective on August 19th, with a huge thank you for your service here at the school for the past 9 years. Second? All right. So, if there's any questions from the public, we can go ahead and vote. And all in favor? Opposed? All right, there you go. Okay, public comment. Do we have any public comment this evening? Yes.
Do you want us to speak to that?
We conducted several interviews last week, and we are in the process of moving forward with a candidate. So by the next board meeting, you should be accepting a new hire.
Great. Okay, a little guidance here. Do we need a motion to go into an executive session? And then after we go into executive session, we adjourn, and then we make a motion to end this meeting? Correct? Okay, so yeah, we're going into executive session. There will not be any action taking during this session. After we get out, we will adjourn the meeting. So there'll be no other topics after executive session. So if people don't want to stick around, they don't have to. So at this point, I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session at 8:11 for the purpose of an employee evaluation. Second? Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, everybody.